The Aldis podcast is brought to you by Aldis International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Alex Siegman. Alex is the machine learning technical program manager at Google AI. Alex, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thanks, JP. It's great to catch up with you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned there, back to the show, you were one of the very first guests when we first started the podcast many years ago now. So A lot has changed in the AI space, but let's start with yourself. For people who didn't catch the early episode, if you can give us a quick background and overview of your journey in tech, and then we'll talk about what's changed since we last had you on the show.
Sure, yeah. So when we last spoke, I was a technical program manager at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Prior to that, I actually had a sort of a unique route into tech. I was a philosophy major in undergrad, and I got my master's degree in journalism. And through a series of really fortunate events and meeting the right people, I slowly but surely made my way and I just became really passionate about programming and data science and artificial intelligence. And I began my career looking at how we can apply AI to journalism and media. And as I moved over into Google, I expanded that to more broad scale research.
So you mentioned you made the switch over to Google. So talk to us about your current role. What are you currently working on?
So I sit within the research org and in a sub-organization that we call Perception. And we work with a lot of human-centric research, ultimately trying to understand how humans act and interact with each other and with technology. I can't delve into too many details on the specific research itself, but there's a lot of focus on foundation models and large language models, a real increased focus in products like Bard, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and just setting ourselves up to bring about these really transformative changes over the next couple of months with everything that's happening in the space. We also do a lot of work with what we call perception fairness, which is one of, I've got to be at least 10 or 20 internal groups looking to ensure that everything we do at every stage adheres to the Google AI principles. So this includes everything from manually conducting adversarial testing on products like Bard to developing novel infrastructures to automate the analysis of possible biases in a training data set. So it's a really wide-ranging scope. It's been a fantastic experience.
Yeah, thanks for the detail there. Really sets up a fascinating role. So I'd love to have you help us visualize what that looks like day to day. I'm sure there's a lot of variety, but what does your role entail and what's a typical day and work week look like for you?
Yeah, a lot of meetings. It's a very geographically distributed team. We got a lot of folks in California, some in Seattle. We've got a team in India, all up and down the East Coast and throughout the Midwest too. So there's a lot of meetings throughout the day, unique hours from time to time. But ultimately, I think the crux of the job is working to understand the full scope of work across a dozen or more different research areas and really trying to coordinate efforts, cycle through approvals, provide technical or fairness related input, and also a lot of strategy work too. As you can imagine, with a 1,000-person org, there can be a lot of duplicative efforts. There can be a lot of similar conversations ongoing and a lot of sort of similar work streams of research, and really trying to optimize and tie those conversations together and take a more strategic view. So the way I think about it is looking to understand our organization's top goals for the year and then maybe beyond like the next 3 years, and tie that to everything ongoing around data collection, synthetic data generation, our compute needs, our internal organization and culture, headcount, hiring student researchers or visiting scientists, managing budget, working with overseas contractors, working with like the legal teams. So there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. But the ultimate goal is understanding where we're trying to head and help march everybody in the same direction through all of the logistical and sort of legal hoops, through all of the bureaucracy, through all the organization, and just really push us forward.
Yeah. So look, a lot of what you listed out there, each of them in their own right are challenging, interesting, and rewarding work. So given you've got such a broad scope, I'd love to get a bit more insight into what you find are the most rewarding aspects of the job.
Every day, I think there's no way that this work could get more exciting or more relevant. And I'm sure I'll say this again in 6 months, but right now it really does feel like we're at this pivotal stage in AI of its exponential growth. What I really feel confident are going to be these life and society changing technologies is just such a once in a lifetime opportunity. And that alone is incredibly rewarding. And the other thing that I really appreciate is I get to work on these things through all aspects of their life cycle. So everything from data collection to legal approvals, model design and architecture, deployment, product conversations. I get to be a part of all of that kind of through these efforts to organize and streamline. And then to see these products out in the real world, even if they're in something like AI Test Kitchen or the BARD release, to see other people use that and benefit from it and see all the coverage around it is just so fascinating. The best example I can give is one of the first projects I worked on when I joined Google was building the taxonomy and clearing all the roadblocks to do a data collection in Africa and India that was meant to be a fairness, robust evaluation data set. Basically to ensure that teams' person detected models work on users of all skin tones. We will sometimes go out and try to put together data sets that have people with traditionally darker skin tones, in this case, again, from Africa and India. And we'll run the models over those data sets to make sure that they're performing as well as they would on any other data set. And it's so cool because this was the first project I worked on. And then I think it was this past Super Bowl, so February, when the Pixel team was doing all their ads on, I think it was Magic Eraser, and that was like the hero feature of the latest Pixel, knowing that those same detectors and that research that helped build these features, at some point over the last year, they were running those models over this fairness eval set that I helped put together to ensure that it was ready and met these fairness standards. And so to see something that you've worked on advertised during the Super Bowl is really neat. Yeah, and then in the last part too is just the people are fantastic. They're brilliant, they're creative, they're motivated, they are collaborative, they're always willing to kind of jump in and help. And it's a great group, amazing work, once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm very grateful to be where I am.
I've been looking forward to this interview for a few reasons. Obviously, to learn about what you were doing and get the updates and have you back on the show as one of our original guests. But one of the big things I wanted to do was use this as an opportunity to get some insight for our audience to understand the interview process at Google. So if you could, I know you can't give away too much of the cheat code, but I'd love for you to just walk us through what your experience was like from timeline steps and see if there's anything from it that we could share with the audience, because I know many of them would love to work at Google.
Definitely. I was hired during the sort of like peak COVID hiring for Google. And so it's been about 2 years. I don't know if the process itself has changed. I know there have been like some hiring freezes, but overall, I feel confident that my experience interviewing, kind of the underlying principles and culture around interviewing and hiring are the same still, because I still serve as an active interviewer myself. But so as far as my experience, it was exactly 3 months end to end. From the time I got my first call from a recruiter as just my first phone screening, exactly 3 months after that, I received my offer and then started 2 weeks later. The interview process is lengthy. There's multiple rounds, and you end up speaking with, I think in my experience, I probably ended up having 7 or 8 separate either phone calls or video meets. Again, this was during peak COVID, so there were no on-site interviews. One thing I thought that was really interesting that I hadn't experienced with many other or any other companies really was the interviewers are really focused on evaluating the interviewee at a role or a function level versus in terms of area of expertise. So for instance, let's say you are applying to be a technical program manager. They're really more keen on understanding, is this somebody who can be a good technical program manager anywhere in Google versus just for a particular team or a particular role? And what they usually do is throughout the first parts of the interview process, they're evaluating your skills as a technical program manager. And then if they decide we want this person, you'll go through like a team matching exercise where it's then a joint effort between you and Google on what team, what project might you best fit into. And I think it's great because it really speaks to the internal mobility around Google and Alphabet in general. And they're really looking for people who can perform these job functions well, knowing that Google is a very fast moving, agile place where you're working with a lot of ambiguity, and they want to make sure that you have the overarching skills. Obviously, domain expertise helps, but I think first and foremost, they're really looking to make sure you can perform that job itself.
You are listening to the Aldis Podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.aldis.com.
I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but I want to ask it for the benefit of everyone. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to work at Google? What steps can they take? And when in process, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to not be intimidated. I know that's really tough. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, Google was always the dream company to work at. And this was the dream role. And it can be really scary. And you hear things about like Google being harder to get into than Harvard, and the number of people who apply and fly out to Mountain View, but ultimately don't get it. And it can certainly be scary and intimidating. But from what I've seen, I think one is the interviewers really, they're just like me. They're just Googlers who are really trying to understand who might best fit at Google. And we're just regular Googlers who are conducting these interviews. And I think the other piece too is so many people I work with come from such unique backgrounds, both personally and professionally. And so it sounds cliche, but there really is a place at Google for everybody. And regardless of your background, regardless of especially like your academic background, and even within research, the people I work most closely with, who is one of our legal counsel, who I view as like a mastermind when it comes to understanding the legal landscape around artificial intelligence, which is moving so fast. I learned recently that she was at one of the fashion institutes in New York, and she was a fashion designer for a long time before going back to law school and ultimately winding up at Google and becoming a very high ranking legal counsel. And yet, so I think there's so much opportunity. There's so much that goes on at Google that there's a role for just about everybody with ever backgrounds they have.
On a more practical standpoint, what are some of the skills and qualifications that are important to your group, the team that you work with? What do you see as being any common trends of the team that you've hired, and what makes people successful?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to being a program manager or a technical program manager, the biggest things are communication skills, organization, and documentation, and then also inclusion. And by that, I mean, this partly ties into communication skills, making sure you know your audience and you are understanding the scope of your work. So for instance, documentation, whatever it is that you use at your company, if it's PRDs or if it's wiki pages, shared drives, Slack channels, making sure that you have a clear way to inform an entire audience at different levels of scope what is going on, and making sure that everybody is informed, that everybody has an opportunity to give their buy-in. Again, for that, design sprints, stand-ups, one-on-ones, Trello boards, shared Word docs, whatever it might be. For communication, stand-ups, weekly digests, newsletters. There's so many different ways to do it. And even within Google, we use lots of different tools, and a lot of it comes down to personal preference. But again, I come back to it's really all about communication skills, organization, documentation, and inclusion. I think those four things really make a great technical program manager.
I want to use the last part of the conversation to delve into some trends that you're seeing in the field. You're uniquely positioned where you've got a bird's eye view of a lot of what's coming down the line. So can you give us some insight in some of the trends that you're seeing and what you're excited about?
Yeah, I think it's hard to not sound like you're hopping on the bandwagon, because I don't know about you, but my LinkedIn feed is just all generative AI and large language models. But that it really is what I'm most excited about from a technical perspective, at least. For instance, to prepare for this conversation, I asked Bard to generate a list of questions that a podcast host might ask a technical program manager at Google. I jotted down some notes. But so I think technically it's fascinating, but I think also just the productization and the applications of this work is so vast, especially in the generative space. I think the other thing that gets me most excited is seeing how many public discussions there are around how we as a society are preparing for this inflection point in AI. I honestly haven't given enough thought yet to my exact feelings on AGI, and I don't think we're at that inflection point yet, but we certainly are at a point where the power of these generative models and these large language models is going to just skyrocket in the next few months. I think the public discussions that we're having as a society are just so important. It really wasn't until November with ChatGPT's release that all of a sudden it seemed everybody from all walks of life, and not just academics or the large institutions, it began seriously contemplating and discussing the impact these technologies will have. And I think it's such an important discussion. And I think over the next 6 months are really just going to be pivotal, not just for AI researchers, not just for Google, but for society's relationship with technology. If you think about in October of this year, we were in one place, and then it's seemingly overnight with ChatGPT, we were in a whole nother realm with regards to AI and its availability. We're kind of living in this moment where any day we can wake up and the whole scope of the game can be completely changed. And I think that's so exciting, but it's also great to see that people are having these conversations much more publicly.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question from me, Alex, that slightly different format to how I would usually conduct these interviews, but given you're one of the very, very first guys on and we're over 500 episodes later, when you look back at the last 4 years of your own journey, what's changed since we last spoke?
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger curve.
Yes, absolutely.
But it was for anyone who's not, you're essentially looking at, on the x-axis, you have knowledge on some topic or in some area, and on the y-axis, you have confidence. And kind of the traditional path is when you start out, you've got little knowledge and high confidence, and you feel like you know everything, everything's oversimplified. As you learn more, you start dipping down, your knowledge goes up, your confidence goes down until you hit that trough of, you feel like you know absolutely nothing. And then you keep going all the way towards the end of the curve where you end up with a lot of knowledge. And the best way to describe everything is just, trust me, it's complicated. And I feel like in the last 4 years, I've really expedited my path through that curve. I think when we first spoke, obviously from a technical perspective, things were a little simpler back then, but everything in the scope of AI really seemed a lot simpler. It was a lot of deep neural networks and traditional modeling techniques, CNNs, and we were talking a lot about the applications for media and natural language processing and generation, but things were relatively still so nascent compared to where we are. And now, as I at Google Research and really about as ahead of the curve as you can get as far as subject matter. I feel like I'm at that point, I'm at my trough where I definitely know much more than I ever did, but at the same time, it feels like it's a drop in the ocean, it's scratching the surface. It feels like we've just come such a long way from when I felt like understanding the mechanisms behind neural networks and deep learning as being the pinnacle of AI comprehension. So yeah, I think that point of trust me, it's complicated is going to keep getting pushed back because the field is shifting so quickly, but it really makes for an exciting career, an exciting time when you're always trying to play catch up. I think that's much more preferable to being contented or even bored in a role.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for coming back and agreeing to do this. Very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It feels like many moons ago that we sat down and I explained the concept of the podcast. And thanks to early guests like yourself, we've been able to grow it to where it is now. So we're very much grateful. And congratulations on your own career success. It's been an amazing 4 years for you. And we look forward to having you back on the show again in another few years and see what else you've been able to accomplish. So
Perfect.
Thanks again.
Perfect. Thanks, JP.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Aldous Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.aldous.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.